Dobrý den. Hello. Good morning. Thank you, everyone, that you came. We will have this event in English because we have visitors from World Bank and from European Commission. So I hope it is okay with you. So we can start. So first speech would be by our Deputy Minister, Ms. Lenka Dupáková.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dear representatives of the World Bank and European Commission, allow me first welcome you of all here at the Ministry of Finance at the opening hearing on the national strategy for the development of the capital market in the Czech Republic 2019-2023. History of this document dates back to 2015, when the Ministry of Finance started this project upon the initiative of the Czech Capital Market Association and as reaction to Capital Markets Union started by European Commission. In 2016, the Ministry of Finance, using the chance of financing by the Structural Reform Support Program of European Commission, contacted the World Bank with a proposal for drawing up a comprehensive analysis of the Czech capital market that would clarify an unbiased perspective of the Czech capital market and provide an international comparison. Afterwards, the analysis served as a basis for the preparation of the national strategy, also happening with the help of the World Bank, and the financing by the European Commission, to whom I would like to thank for their contributions. Now, after almost 4 years, it finally seems that the journey comes to the end. The national strategy has been subject of interministerial comment procedure and all contradictions have been settled. During the forthcoming years, the national strategy will be submitted to the government to be improved. After that, we should make every effort to put the measures from the national strategy into practice and thus to ensure that there not be only paper, but also it will be applied in reality, in praxis. To implement some of these measures, we will hopefully cooperate again with the European Commission and also with the World Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you regard the development of the Czech capital market as important as we do. And I can promise you that the Ministry of Finance will continue its effort in this direction and we will do whatever is possible to achieve the set goals. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So now I will pass the speech to David Owens from European Commission.
Thanks, Alice, and thanks also to the Deputy Minister. Well, some of what I was going to say has really already been said. I'll just introduce myself. My name is David Owens, and I work in the Structural Reform Support Service of the European Commission. I see many of you around here who we've met with over the last 2 or 3 years, as the Deputy Minister was referring to. And just to give a few reasons, I know I'm probably preaching to the converted here. Everyone in this room, I think, understands why capital markets are important, but maybe just to give 1 or 2 reasons why the Commission is very supportive of this initiative. One is financial stability. I'm Irish, and 10 years ago, our banks basically stopped. They froze. So while Europe in general is very reliant on bank lending, it's not necessarily a financially stable method of supporting your businesses. And the Commission's Capital Markets Union, its real raison d'etre is to try and bring together trapped savings and kind of unproductively used savings and connect that up with the investment-hungry businesses that we know are out there and that the World Bank's assessment showed are here in the Czech Republic also. So that's financial stability plus the efficiency of the market. Those 2 are big reasons why we would like to see the capital markets develop. And it's not just the listed markets, it's also private equity, the smaller thing the Commission has brought out, as you know, crowdfunding initiatives. We also supported a business angels project here with the Czech authorities. So it's a broad sweep of initiatives and of supports, and the journey has already been 3 or 4 years, but it will continue. There are other support projects in the pipeline that we're interested in continuing with. I'd just like to, again, pay tribute to the World Bank, whose assessment was very detailed. They looked, say, at the companies register here to see how many firms were capital markets ready, looked at around all the regulatory side, the legal side, even the tax side. So all of these areas are very important to try and grow and build a capital market which can act as a support to investment and reduce the reliance on banks, because the bank channel can suddenly and unpredictably cease to work, whether the banks are domestic or primarily foreign. It doesn't. They're so connected now that can become a problem very quickly. So what's next is we're going to continue. We hope to support the Czech authorities, and that the Capital Markets Union, as a Commission initiative, they're hoping by the middle of next year to kind of complete this phase of it. But I think our work with the Czech authorities will continue well beyond that. And I'd be happy to take any questions in the session that follows. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Now I pass to Raquel from the World Bank.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of the World Bank, I want to welcome you all to this event. For those that don't know us, I'm sure most of you do. My name is Raquel Letelier. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and with me I have Robert Singletary, our expert consultant on capital markets, who was the main author of the capital market assessment that you may have read. So what I don't want to dwell too much on explaining again why capital markets is important. I'm sure that we all agree why. Just wanted to say that under a first stage, we prepared with the auspices of the European Commission a capital market assessment to identify the main issues and provide recommendations for the short, medium, and long term to further develop the market. Based on that assessment, under a second stage, the Ministry of Finance has prepared a national strategy for the next 5 years, and to which we have continued our support by providing comments and to support the ministry in their discussions with relevant stakeholders in the government and in the industry. We understand that most of you have provided some comments to a draft that was shared, and we want to continue our support to the Ministry of Finance for this important initiative that would allow to guide the discussions going forward and identify the main issues and reaching a consensus to undertake the measures that are necessary to facilitate the development of the market and to provide the necessary incentives for investors and issuers to use other means of financing beyond bank financing. We're here to listen to you this morning, to hear your comments, your ideas, your suggestions, and how to make this document strong enough to this end. So I'll just stop here.
Thank you. So now I will start the presentation of the national strategy. Just wanted to tell that we have a coffee now. So if you want coffee, you can you can take. The presentation itself is in Czech language, but I will speak English. Many things were said, but maybe I will repeat them for the clarity. It's this national strategy. We started working on it when the Commission adopted the initiative called Capital Markets Union in February 2015, and since then we are trying to identify issues that we think cannot be solved on the EU level, mainly due to constraints that the European law has. They cannot really harmonize everything. Particularly, they cannot. They have limited powers in relation to pension funds and to taxation, and there are also other national rules, which we sometimes call gold plating, where we adopt our national measures on top of the requirements coming from the European Union. While we were developing the national strategy, we identified some measure that could be useful, but we were lacking a comprehensive analysis. So the measures were, I would say, individual. They were not holistic. So we asked the World Bank to prepare a thorough analysis of the of our capital market, especially in relation to international comparison, where the Czech Republic stands and what are the potentials, what is missing. So further measures were identified in the report by the World Bank, which we published last year in October. And we also realized that the national strategy, which should give guidance for the future and should provide a stability of the regulatory environment, needs to be revised from time to time. And also some of the proposals were not possible in a short term or medium term, really needed more work to do, or there are some assumptions that need to be fulfilled. So we decided that we will limit the strategy in 5 years, just so that we can really focus on each of the measures and see if they can be implemented in this period, giving us the possibility to review the strategy after these 5 years, assess if the measures were fulfilled, and if further measures were identified. Our main goal is to achieve a standard that is usual in Western countries. We know that we are missing 40 years of development, which is mainly has impact on the pension funds. When you look at the countries that had high market capitalization in relation to the GDP or have well-functioning capital markets, the main players on the capital market are pension funds, which exist hundreds of years, and therefore they have a lot of potential, a lot of power. And if we say that, for example, the pension fund will invest 1% of its assets into private equity, in terms of scope, it means a lot more money than in the Czech Republic. the World Bank identified that the savings rate of the Czech population is good. It's one of the best in the European Union, including the Western countries. And also, if you see the statistics of the Czech National Bank, you can see that the savings are constantly growing. So there is a positive trend. But yes, as I try to show on this slide, we are trying to catch the Western countries, but the Western countries are not waiting for us. They are also developing. So it is really a long-term strategy or long-term vision. And it cannot be achieved simply through this development of the capital market. There are other measures necessary that are all going on different platforms that deal with some particular issues, which are also relevant from the point of view of the capital market. But the idea, among others, is that if we will have well-functioning capital markets, it will make the Czech economy more effective, and it will help to create more jobs with additional value. So in the end, it can even lead to raise of wages in comparison to the Western countries, raise of purchasing powers of the Czech inhabitants. The strategy as it is now is almost finalized. We have sent it to the interministerial discussions. We received some comments which we dealt with. So there is no conflict between ministries, and also no conflict within the Ministry of Finance, because there are also some other departments that are they have their own agenda that is also related to the capital market. But we also asked some of the market participants to send us their comments, because, as you will see, for each of the measure, it cannot be really fulfilled by the Ministry of Finance only. We need cooperation with other ministries and government agencies like Czech Invest, and with market participants. So we thought it is reasonable to consult them too. We received a lot of comments that we are still trying to incorporate. But we are very close to the finalization, after which we plan to submit the national strategy to the government for approval. The strategy is divided, I would say, into three main parts. The first part is analytical, which tries to analyze different views on different statistics. Then there is a part that is devoted to how the regulatory process should be done, so that there is stability and predictability of the regulatory environment, and that the concerns of the capital market participants and consumers are taken into account. And then there is something called action plan, which is a set of measures with time periods, deadlines that we want to fulfill. And as similarly to the European Commission approach in the Capital Markets Union, we adopt the similar approach that not a single measure can lead to the development of the capital market. It has to be a set of measures targeting different participants. Usually when we have a job interview, we ask people, what is a capital market? And it is really difficult for them, especially if they are lawyers, because this term is nowhere defined. But for economists, it's probably easier. But the basic idea, it's a market, so it's where the demand and supply meets. And who are the ones, the main actors? The main actors are investors who have access of free capital. And on the other side are issuers who need capital for their development. And then there is the market environment, the professional providers of services, what we call a market infrastructure, which help the investors and issuers to meet. When you consider who are the investors, usually you would think that the investors are pension funds, investment funds, brokers, and banks. But if you look closely on who is really investing on the market, it's usually retail investors, because in the pension funds, these are not the money of the pension fund. These are money that are entrusted to the pension fund by the retail investors. So therefore, we focus on the part of investors mainly on the households, and we consider this from the perspective of pensions. We know that there is some demographic issues with the Czech population, and the first pillar of the pension system is not sustainable. So everyone needs to have some reserve for himself that can be used in the pension, so he doesn't lose his life quality. But what we see in the analysis is that the Czech households are afraid of the capital market. They prefer to keep the money on the bank account. But what they don't realize is that if you keep the money on the bank account for a longer period of time, for 20, 30 years, then the inflation will devaluate the value of your money. And even though in a nominal amount you still have the same money, and you will not be able to buy the same things for this money in 20 years. So therefore it is necessary that the households realize this and try to diversify their portfolio and try to find something that will provide them with higher yield, that will give them the ability to overcome the inflation and preserve the real value of money. The other question that is analyzed in the analytical part, and I will come to this more in detail in further slides, is that the Czech companies usually don't use the capital market for financing. They are very much used to taking bank loans, or they finance themselves from their profit, or they use grants from the European Union. And it is slowly changing. We could see, I would say, a boom of corporate bonds being issued by several companies in the last few years. due to different reasons, mainly low interest rates and also I would say deregulation in the field of bonds that came into force in 2012. So why are we preparing the national strategies? Firstly, we think it is useful, it is needed, because it gives us a longer term vision. And even though I say that there would be a revision after 5 years, this doesn't mean a complete overhaul. I think there are principles that should be preserved for further versions, and the revision should mainly focus on the measures proposed. There can be an update on the analytical part to see if there are some positive trends that we would like to support. But really, I think already now there are some parts of the national strategy that should prevail for forever, I would say. The other thing is that, as was mentioned by David, the dependency of firms of the real economy on the banks and on the bank loans can lead to instability under some circumstances where the banks can cease to provide loans to some companies, and if there is no alternative, this would basically mean a default of the company. So we think that to have a sustainable economic growth, we need a combination of both market-based and bank-based economy, so that there are alternatives to the banking finance. But this doesn't mean that the banking finance will cease to exist or cease to play the most important role. Also, due to traditions and kind of conservatism or people are used to this system, and it will also help the Czech companies to be more competitive in the international environment. The vision is to come close to the Western countries, or we can set a smaller goal just to reach the average of the European Union. But the Western countries are really far ahead from the Eastern countries. So even though the World Bank in their assessment considers the Czech Republic to be one of the best, or maybe the best from the new entrants of the European Union, in comparison to the Western countries, we are like 10% of their usual size. So we were considering in this regard the market capitalization and the liquidity on the stock exchange, how the Czech entrepreneurs finance their business, and how are the savings of the household, what they consist of. And by having a clear data on this, we are able to see if there is any development and if the measures were successful. Of course, we cannot really avoid some externalities, so there can be some development regardless of the measures that we propose. But as I say, if the measures simply support an existing trend and give it some leverage, then we can consider it already as a success. So how do we want to achieve the goal? So it's by following following the measurements that we set, trying to keep the national strategy up to date in terms of the individual measures, and by doing further analysis. Because as you will see, there are the 20 plus measures, and it was not really in our capacities nor in the capacities of the World Bank to do a thorough analysis of each of them. So sometimes the measures as they are proposed are starting with the suggestion that an analysis is needed, and then on the basis of the results of the analysis, it should be decided what is the best way forward. Now we are coming to the analytical part. I understand you cannot see it on the presentation, but if you took the brochures that are available here, you can see the graphs from closer look. What we see here on the first graph is that the deposits in bank are still around 50% of all the savings, and for example, the pension funds, they are a very small portion of where the savings are. This can be also seen from the second graph, where we decided to divide the European Union into two parts. First, what we call traditional EU countries, the ones that entered the European Union before 2004, are the EU 15. So these are the developed Western countries. And the EU 13 we use as a designation for countries that entered the European Union later. So these are mainly the 10 countries that entered in 2004, but also other new entrants. And we can see that, especially in relation to the pension funds, the EU 15 is far ahead. Also, I'm not sure if it's better seen on your graph. Yeah, on your graph you can see that the black dot and the white white square, they represent a percentage of that in the overall portfolio. What we call financial assets. So this does not include real estate. And we see that the last column, which is the deposits in the bank, for both for the Czech Republic and for the EU 13, they form a large proportion. This is something that we think should be discussed because there is also a problem of size of the portfolio. We can see that both investment funds and pension funds consist a much larger portion in the Western countries. But this is also because the overall size of the portfolio of each individual is larger. The usual saying is that you should have 3 months of your income, or some say 6 months of your income in liquid assets, which usually translate as bank deposits. So if something happens to you, these assets are readily available. I think this concept is good. It is generally accepted. I just think it is unfair to say that the only liquid product where you can store your money is in your pillow or in the bank. I think there are other liquid instruments, and they usually say, like, what if your car breaks? What if your refrigerator breaks? For this you need these deposits. But really, for example, if you invest in an investment fund, you will receive your money in 15 days at the latest, but usually it's more. It's like five working days. Do you really need the money tomorrow, so they need to be stored in a bank, or can you have them in some other liquid instruments that can be sold easily? I think this could be revised, but in general, I think the large portion of deposits is caused by this, that the people want to have a readily available reserve of cash in case there is any trouble, like if they lose their job or something like this. Now the second part is about the analysis of the companies, the Czech companies. Again, we compare the EU13 and EU15, but we included just to show how huge is the difference. Also, the United Kingdom, which is for sure the leader in this regard. They have the most developed capital market in the European Union, and this was acknowledged also in the Capital Markets Union, that sometimes you need to consider the European Union, where you think of it if it's market-based or bank-based, without United Kingdom, because the other countries, the continental Europe, it's mainly bank-based. Even large and developed countries like France and Germany would have a smaller portion of the capital market than, and if you compare it with United States, then the measures would be even more obvious. But we can say that this somehow shows a trend that we want to go. It shows that really the difference of the Czech Republic in comparison to the new EU countries, it's not that big. I think Czech Republic is above average from the perspective of the capital market, but still more needs to be done if we want to come closer to the Western countries or to the average of the European Union as a whole. And we think one of the reasons that may be the cause of this is that especially the small and medium-sized enterprises are not aware of the possibilities of the capital market, or they are afraid of it because they think there is a lot of regulation that needs to be fulfilled, so they prefer to go to a bank where they will receive the loan and they know what they can expect. Therefore, we think it is important really to educate the small and medium-sized enterprises about the possibilities of the capital market and advantages it has, so that they are aware of it, and when they consider how they will finance their business, they will consider it as an alternative. In the result might be that they, in the end, decide to go for the bank loan, but they should at least consider the options. What we heard is that sometimes the banks include so many conditions in the contract, they are called covenants, that really limit the possibilities of development of the company. So there are several examples where a company in the Czech Republic issued bonds or equity to repay bank loans, so that they are not limited in this way. And as they are the issuers, they can determine the limits that they think they are appropriate for them. Whereas for the bank, I think these are usual parts of the contract that are not really tailor-made for each individual company, but they just include them in every contract. And we think this could be useful, or this could be good or irrelevant for a company that doesn't want to grow and just wants to live in the state that it is. But for a growth company, I think these limits can be crucial. The last part of the analysis, we wanted to compare the regulated stock market with other counterparts, because usually, for example, again, European Commission and Capital Markets Union, when we're considering how much is the capital market developed, they took the market capitalization and compare it to the GDP of the country, and it showed how big is the capital market. In this regard, it shows, for example, the Czech Republic has 10% market capitalization to GDP. So we were thinking if it is possible to raise this market capitalization, and there are certain limits that prevent us to do it. The first limit is the size of the economy, which determines the size of the businesses. And not all of the businesses are eligible to be listed on a stock exchange. The usual rule of thumb is that the market capitalization should be at least 100 million euros, so that the issue is sufficiently liquid. And there are not really that many issuers that would fulfill this criteria. So how can we make the capital market more developed? How can we enlarge this proportion? We were not sure. But when we were looking at what happened at the end of the 90s, or what is the current state in Romania, it can happen that you have a lot of issuers admitted to the capital market, but they are listed just for some historical reasons, and there is not enough liquidity. So in this regard, the market capitalization can deceive you by thinking that if you have 500 companies there, that this makes the capital market larger. Also interesting comparison is if you compare the market capitalization of Prague Stock Exchange with market capitalization of RM System, you will find that the market capitalization of RM System is much higher than the capitalization of stock exchange. So we started to ask why is it, and should we use the market capitalization as a measure. The reason is that in the RM system there are some companies listed there that are not really traded in large amounts, like Microsoft, Google, McDonald's, and these companies which have different primary markets. But just because they were accepted to listing, it raised the market capitalization. So the Prague Stock Exchange in May has introduced, I think, 27 new issues of large companies from abroad that were considered can be interesting for the Czech citizens because they are known here. So there is Deutsche Bank, I think, Juventus Turin, and so on. So suddenly the market capitalization of the Prague Stock Exchange skyrocketed but does it mean that now we have a developed capital market? No. So we think, yes, there is a clear, you can really see a clear connection between the size of the issue and the liquidity of the issue. So if there is a huge market capitalization of the company, then usually there will be a much higher liquidity. But then if you look at some of the companies, they are listed in several stock exchanges. So for example, Google would be listed on 5 different stock exchanges. Does it mean that it adds to the market capitalization of all of them? Also, the market capitalization is considering the whole own funds, whole cap equity of the company, regardless how much of it is really available for trading and how much is held by a major shareholder. So we decided that the best measure how to see if the stock exchange is working should be to look how many trades there are, if the market lives, if it is liquid, and this is shown on the first graph. We also are in process of analyzing the comparison with the Western countries, but there is more data to analyze. So we are still in the process of analyzing. It will show the gap between the new entrants and the old EU countries. But I think from this comparison, it really confirms what the World Bank said, that the Czech Republic is one of the leaders of the market. We have more liquid market than, for example, Romania, which is a country much bigger than us, with the potential to have larger undertakings. The Poland, for different reasons, is more liquid. We can discuss why is it the case, but one of the causes is again the size of the economy. But there are also other reasons like the privatizations, the pension funds, the overall state support the capital market receives in Poland. The question about the Hungary, again, we are analyzing it. It surprised us because we wouldn't consider Hungary to be 3 times more liquid as the Czech Republic. But we have not yet received any conclusion or any data that would explain it. But one of the suggestions was that it is the way how the reports, how the trades are reported to the stock exchange, that there is probably a law that forces the companies to do the trades on the stock exchange and not over the counter. I think this could be a reasonable explanation, and we could see it also in the Czech Republic in the liquidity of bonds, where just by changing the IT system, the liquidity was very low, because many of the trades with the bonds happened outside of the exchange, and they were only reported to the exchange for settlement. And before the change of the methodology, they were considered as trades on the exchange. Now there is a difference, so it really in the statistics of the stock exchange, it is shown what trades were really executed on the exchange and which one were just reported. So now we move to the individual measures, and we start with the measures for the support of investors, the households, because I think that they are the most important. From our side, there is a lot of potential, and there is clearly a need. For the company, if it takes a bank loan, there is not really a huge issue about it. It may be less advantages for it, there may be covenants, but it is not destructive. But when we consider households, the problem that they don't have enough savings for the pensions can have really detrimental impact in not so far distant future, like in 20 or 30 years. So we think that they should be our primary focus. The first, and I would say probably the most important measure in the strategy is the introduction of what we call individual savings account. But really the term can be deceptive, because these individual savings account exist in various forms around the world, and we are not really considering a single model as the only one that should be applied. But if I could explain it on the Czech terms, then today there is a tax advantage for you if you save for your pension, but only for certain products. Namely, if you save in pension funds, or if you save in life insurance, then you can receive, and your employer can receive a tax benefit. Also, for pension funds, we have direct government support, meaning that for your investments, the government will also add you some money directly. But if you decide to save your money elsewhere, because, for example, you think that the pension funds don't provide you with sufficient yield, that they will not overcome the inflation, and in the long terms you will be losing money, and this can even consume the money that you received from the government in the long term. And you decide, for example, that you want to save the money in an investment fund, then there is no tax subsidy. And we and our colleagues from tax department, we think that this is against the tax neutrality principle, that the financial products should not be assessed on the basis of their name or their regulation, on their form, but they should be assessed on the basis of their substance. So if I create a product that can be used for savings for pension, this should receive the same tax support as the other products. So basically, this is the idea. As I said, we are in consensus with our tax colleagues. So this will be proposed. We need also to prepare some amendments to the law that are in our competence to make it work. But I think this is something that can be delivered quite soon. Therefore, we established the end of the next year as a deadline. But you should consider this deadline as a deadline that when we plan to submit the draft law to the government. There will, of course, be some discussions before we submit it to the government, some consultations. But we think if we really consider everything and how much time was already devoted to this project, especially by the Capital Market Association, I think this is achievable, and this can be done, and this will have, I think, very, very interesting result on the capital market. Even though the overall savings for the pensions don't necessarily need to raise as a result of this, I think there will be a more diversification. It will be possible to use these funds for capital market, because nowadays most of the products most of the money that is saved through pension funds and are placed in the government bonds, because the pension funds are presented to the general public as a secure investment instrument, very similar to the bank deposit. But the problem is if you sell a product as a similar to the bank deposit, ensuring that it will preserve its nominal value, it as a result leads that there is little risk, so there is a little yield. Again, if the inflation target by the Czech National Bank is 2%, if you achieve a lower yield per year, then you are losing the value of the money. The other proposal that we are considering is we want to analyze what are the regulatory costs of distribution, how much of this cost is based from the EU law, and how much is the national rules. The national rules can be revised quite quickly. When it comes from the European Union, that it will take more time. But each of the directive and regulations in the EU, they have a review clause, which means there will be an analysis of the impacts. And for example, one of the issues that we identified is so-called product governance rules, which we think are not really useful for simple investment instruments. So we think this is something that could be revised on the EU level, and if we achieve this, then we will free the potential also for the Czech country. But there are other rules we need to examine, or we want to examine, and we understand that the current distribution model is mainly based on the advice, and that the people are explained in what they are investing, and then they agree to buy the instrument. But what we want to support is if the person decides from his own analysis, from his own initiative, that he wants to invest in some investment fund, we think that this should be cheaper because he receives less services and there are less regulatory environment. And again, this mainly concerns the simple investment instruments that are not, or as they say in English, non-complex instruments that should be available to all retail investors. The third measure in this regard is considering the education about the capital market. Here we have colleagues who have devoted already quite substantial time to financial literacy issue, but the financial literacy only considers the consumers. And if you saw what are the priorities of the financial literacy, it's mainly to fight the indebtedness of the households. So the households take a lot of debt, or they just didn't pay for a ticket in subway, and then the execution comes, the retainers, and the costs of enforcement rise, and the people get in what we call a debt trap, where they cannot really get out of it. This is discussed also in relation to the insolvency law, this personal bankruptcy, that these people should be given opportunity to repay their debt, for example, in smaller part, and then the rest of the debt is forgiven. Because if you are a company and you are bankrupt, then you just liquidate the company, but you cannot really liquidate a person, and it means that when the person is in the debt trap, they cannot get out of it, and they will be in debt for a whole life. I think this is a huge problem for many households, but these are not the households that we consider interesting from the perspective of the capital market, because these households need to repay their debt and they don't have an excessive capital. But there are other households that that are not in debt, or they have mortgage, but this is not considered as a bad debt, and they have some funds on top which are available, and they can either spend it on some new mobile phone or nice holidays, or they can just put it in the pillow. But if they put it in the pillow, as I explained, with the inflation, they will not. They will lose the value of the money in time. So we need to motivate these people or educate them about the possibilities of the capital market, and that really their money should work for them. If they have an excessive money, they should make them work and make more money. They should not just let them sleep. But as I mentioned earlier, this target group, I would say, the retail investors, it's mainly dealt in within the national strategy on financial literacy, and we don't want to interfere with this. And we understand they have different priorities. But what we think we can do for the retail investors is trying to help them indirectly. So, for example, we want to focus on professional investors, professional asset managers that have the money entrusted to them, so that the investor doesn't really need to take any specific investment decisions. He doesn't have to trade every day on the stock market to achieve the profit, but he gives the money to some professional who has more of this money. He has savings from scale, and he can more effectively, and he has also access to more information, and he can more effectively manage these investments. So we think by educating the portfolio managers, the retail investors will have advantages from this. Also, another target group for us is investment advisors, who are the ones that explain to the people the things that I'm explaining to you about the inflation and how they should put their money in work. Again, we think that if the advisors are well educated, which now we think will be ensured by that we now require them to have exams that are standardized. So we know that there is a minimum that every advisor should know that is set in the exams. But we want to explore this further and see if there is not something more that we can do. And the third group, from the perspective of the investors, are what we call investment research or investment analysts, which are people that look at the companies that are listed and they try to analyze them. What is their potential? Will the price go up or down? And they publish reports about this. These reports currently are not available for retail investors. They are only available to professional investors. And also there was a regulatory overhaul in the whole European Union since January this year, the so-called MiFID II rules. So we think there is a shift, there is some distortion in the market. But we think that this is something that we should focus on, and we should help so that the investment research is more available to retail investors, even on a smaller, I would say, in smaller detail than for the professional investors, but that there is something available for them. The other thing that was identified by the World Bank was that it is really difficult for a foreigner person, potentially a foreign investor, to analyze all the data that is available about Czech companies and about Czech capital market. There are different pages. If you're not familiar with them, you probably won't find them. And also these pages are in Czech language only. So again, it's more difficult for someone who doesn't speak Czech to go through the data. So we decided that it would be useful that the Minister of Finance will create some web page where this information will be stored in one place, meaning that through this web page you can get to the other web pages, and if these web pages will be in Czech, it will help you navigate through them so that you can receive the data that you need. The other measure was quite heavily discussed, I would say, in the current discussions. So we still are considering how to revise it, but we think that this is something that is important for the Czech citizens, and therefore it should be somehow reflected in the national strategy. And it's the idea that we didn't enter Eurozone, so we have still our own currency, which is not euro, but most of the investments available are in euro or in US dollar, or you can invest in China, in Japan. So there is a currency risk, and the question is if there is not an issue in this, if this does not limit the possibilities of the Czech investors. At this moment, we think that everything is working the way it should be working. It doesn't mean that it will be working correctly for the whole period of the 5 years, because, for example, just recently we saw that there were some issues in relation to the intervention of the Czech National Bank that were about to end, and the availability of currency hedging was at that time very scarce. Question is what we can do from the regulatory side. I think probably at this moment nothing, because there is no issue at the moment. But we think this is something that we should focus on. And for example, when I was having discussions about the possibility of the Czech Republic to enter Target 2 securities, which allows more easy cross-border transactions and settlement of transactions with securities. The main issue why this is not possible for the Czech Republic at the moment is because we don't have euro as a currency. So we are not part of the target system, which is basis for the Target 2 system. So I think the idea of euro or of Czech koruna is an important one and should be considered. And we are, for example, glad that the listings I mentioned on the Prague Stock Exchange are available for the Czech investors in Czech koruna. So you can buy shares of Deutsche Bank in Czech koruna, and this is more easy for the retail investor to understand and calculate than if he would have to consider another currency. The other thing that we consider important is that there should be a good quality information flow from the issuer to the investor. So we consider this as a measure for the investors, but it is mainly about the idea that if I am a shareholder of a company, I should receive sufficient information. Again, I think for most of the companies it works. mainly if they are listed, they have dematerialized securities. It works quite well, and especially now when we will have a transposition on the directive of shareholders' rights, this will be even improved. But we don't want to focus only on listed companies, but we want to focus also on other companies for which this we think should work. And we have several evidence that, for example, people who invested in the voucher privatization and are still shareholders of a company, there is almost no communication with the shareholders, and even if the shareholders demand information from the company, the information are not received. So we think this is something that we should focus on and see if there is anything that we can do. Of course, the problems voucher privatizations are numerous. But the main issue in this regard, I think, is that the companies were previously listed on the stock exchange, but then they were delisted, and as non-listed companies, they don't have many obligations, even though they still have small shareholders. Some companies manage to squeeze out the small shareholders, but in some companies, the small shareholders are still present, and I would say they are a bit discriminated in comparison to the major shareholder. Now we come to a second set of measures, which is focusing on the real economy and on the issuers, on Czech entrepreneurs. Again, I think that for the large companies, they have sufficient capacities to be able to explore the capital market, and we can see really that for the large enterprises, they are issuing bonds with rating, they are issuing them abroad, they know what are the possibilities, there is probably not a big issue. But most of the Czech companies are small and medium-sized, and especially for the medium-sized companies, we think, again, it is useful to have something, some possibility to reach some information that are relevant for them on how to use the capital market. And I think especially now, after again the stock exchange opened a new market segment called Start for these medium-sized enterprises, this became more visible, and I think more and more companies realize that there are alternatives to the bank financing, but still more can be done in this regard. So one idea is to prepare some, what we call a communication strategy, so to determine how we should talk, with whom who should talk, what should we say, in which form, and so on. So again, this is a measure that we already are cooperating with the European Commission, who have chosen Ernst & Young as a provider of analysis. So the analysis is now ongoing, and we expect it to be delivered during next year. I should also mention that not all of the measures are of legislative nature. So here it is a non-legislative measure. So the term end of the next year means that this is the time when we expect the analysis to be delivered, and on the basis of the analysis we will decide what exactly should be done. So the measure is written in this way, that we should analyze, because we don't know what will be the result of the analysis, and we think it is really important to propose measures that are based on a sufficient analysis. it was also confirmed 2 weeks ago when we had another team from the World Bank doing research of business angels in Czech Republic, and they said like many countries they introduce measures to support business angels, for example tax measures, without any analysis, which has several issues. The first issue is that you really cannot see what is the impact if you don't have the data. What was the state before you introduce the measures? You cannot see what is the impact of your proposals, and the second analysis is the second advantage of analysis is that it helps you to determine if the measure is really necessary or not. So you don't waste your money and time on measures that are not really important. So here we will see what will be the result of the analysis. In relation to the business angels, the strategy was already updated to take into account the recommendations of the World Bank in this regard. So we have focused mainly on the short-term and medium-term measures. The short-term measures say that we should try to gather as much data as possible. The medium-term measures are more specific, and they say like we should help to create a network of business angels, some kind of association that would be our counterpart in the discussions, telling us what are the needs on their side, and we can also discuss with them what we think, and we don't have to target each individual business angel, which anyway would be impossible in these days because we don't know who the business angels are. There is also an idea of what we call a self-certification of business angels, which was given to us. An example how it works in the UK is that the business angel signs a paper saying, I am a business angel, I don't want any protection. And this means that the rules that are basically invented to protect the retail consumers are not applicable to them, and that they can receive more requests from more companies than otherwise would not be available to them. But again, we plan to continue cooperation with the European Commission. We have a request on the continuation of this project, mainly the implementation of the recommendations. So we will see how this request would be assessed and what will be the decision of the Commission if they would like to support us or not. But yeah. The other idea that we were considering is crowdfunding, mainly the investment crowdfunding, because we saw that there is a new platform in the Czech Republic where this crowdfunding is working, I would say, quite well at the moment. So we want to see if there are any issues, because for some companies the more regulated capital market is not available. As I'm speaking about the size, so for example, also if you would like to list yourself on the start market, you should have at least 1 million euros. The market capitalization, which again can be quite huge for some companies. They don't have so huge funding needs. So for smaller, especially for starting companies, it can be useful to have other alternatives, and they can the start of the business can be financed through friends and family. It can be funded by the business angels, but crowdfunding is a new alternative that can be used too, and we want to see, we want to analyze it if there is any issue. As David mentioned, there is a proposal by the European Commission that is discussed currently in the Council about the crowdfunding, how it works. We also were looking in other countries. They were introducing new regulation on crowdfunding, so how it helped their market. At the moment, we don't identify any flaw, any need to engage. But we want to have the national strategy as much comprehensive as possible, so that it really reflects the whole reality, the whole scope of the capital market. Therefore, we consider that the crowdfunding is one of the issues that should be analyzed. And to be honest, I think when I started to analyze crowdfunding, I thought like this is not something new. We have already built a national theater twice with crowdfunding, and you don't need internet for this. And we realized that also there are some issues of corporate bonds that are not sold through internet platforms, but that are sold through other means. And this can be also considered as crowdfunding. If you see the Commission proposal, it in fact says everything that is below €1 million should be considered as crowdfunding. So when we see these corporate bonds with issues lower than €1 million, which are not required to have prospectus, then I think this can be also considered as crowdfunding. So when I said we have one crowdfunding platform, it doesn't mean that there are not other forms of crowdfunding, investment crowdfunding in the Czech Republic available. We can also consider ICOs as a type of crowdfunding, which is also was on the race last year. So this is also an issue that we would like to focus on and analyze. Then there is this idea of introducing a more simple form of joint stock company. We are looking abroad for inspiration, so we know that this type of companies exist in Poland and in Slovakia. Though, for example, in relation to the Slovakia, they have more rigid commercial code, so therefore they have more need for this easier form of joint stock company. In the Czech Republic, after the new commercial code was adopted, it really gives a lot of possibilities to the companies to structure themselves in various forms. So the question is how much work is really needed. But the basic idea is that today, when you want to set up a joint stock company, you need to have the capital at least 2 million Czech crowns, which again can be a limit for some companies that would like to attract more investors in the future, but they don't have the money at the beginning. So what they do, they set up a limited liability company where it is sufficient to have 1 Czech koruna as a capital, and then they, as they grow, then they consider to change the form to the joint stock company. But we think that the joint stock company should be available to the investors from the beginning, especially when we consider the limits of the limited liability partnership. That there are limits on the number of investors. There are limits when the limited liability company issues shares or securities representing a share in that company. They cannot be offered publicly. They cannot be traded. we think that this is really goes against this idea of crowdfunding. That I, for example, have a good idea. I don't want to go to business angels. I don't want to go to my family. But I think this idea is so interesting that it can be financed through crowdfunding. That many people will invest in it small amounts, and as a total, I will be able to run the business. But this would not be available. It would only be possible for me to issue bonds, but it would not be possible for me to issue equity. And the bonds have a problem that for a starting company that has no history, this is considered very risky. The company doesn't have any assets, doesn't have any history, so the bonds would not be bought. What we also see abroad is that for these startups, there is much more availability of convertible bonds. So the bonds that can be transformed to equity. We try to introduce this in a draft law that is currently in the Senate. But we are testing it only for investment firms. But there is already a proposal that allows these type of convertible bonds for a limited liability company. And in the future, we were considering to introduce this possibility also for other types of companies, but there were some issues. So again, we think this easier form of joint stock company could help. But as I say, the main idea is just to lower the requirements on the capital, and maybe the rest of the rules could still apply. But this depends on the discussions we will have. If this lowering of the capital requirement would be acceptable, and probably it would be acceptable only under certain conditions. So therefore, the measure is drafted the way it is. The other idea, again, some of the measures are really interconnected. So this relates also to the idea of the web page, to the flow of the information from issuers to the investors, and also the next measure, which is about corporate governance. Again, if a foreigner person comes here who doesn't speak Czech and he wants to learn something about Czech companies, he might encounter a problem that the companies do not provide information in English. He cannot even use a Google Translate for some documents because they are scanned PDF, so they cannot be translated by computer. So we think that it would be useful to look at this issue and see if there is something we could do. Mainly trying to create some standardized templates and promote them, which will enable the issuers to issue some information in English without much additional costs. I think English is obligatory for the companies listed on the stock exchange, so for them the information are available. Other companies are owned by a foreigner entity, so again there can be information available. For some companies this wouldn't have any advantage. They don't have foreigner customers, they don't export, they don't want to attract foreign investors. So for some companies that would not be useful, but we still think there is a number of companies that might find this useful. The idea is not to have a regulatory requirement, so again this should be a non-legislative measure, but some sort of support might be needed. But again, this is a thing we consider might be useful, but we still need analysis. The other idea that was mentioned often is the international financial reporting standards, so the accounting standards. That the international investors are used to these international standards. Czech companies can use them if they want. Also, some of them are obliged to use them, mainly, again, the listed companies. But at the same time, they are required to also have the Czech accounting standards, mainly for the purposes of taxation. So it basically leads to the necessity for the listed issuers to have double accounting, to keep both Czech records and international records. And this is very costly. And we think this could be discouraging for some issuers, potential issuers that would like to enter the Prague Stock Exchange, be listed there, but in the end they calculated that this will bring them additional costs which they are not prepared to bear. For example, what is interesting that on the start market, these international standards are not required because it is not a regulated market. It is MTF, multilateral trading facility. So this standard is not required. But we are trying to look at it from a broader perspective, and we think again, if we don't define the capital market as being only the stock exchange, but if we define the capital market to be much broader and includes also the private equity funds, venture capital, business angels, again, for the international investors, the Czech accounting standards would be very difficult to analyze. And this can be detrimental for the availability of funding for the companies. It can have also indirect impact on the Czech investors, because the Czech investors know that if they would like to sell the business further, if they would like to exit the investment, they will have problems finding the investor because they are not using the international standards. So in this regard, we welcomed very much the initiative by our colleagues from accounting department, who are dedicating to this issue a lot of their time for several years, and they are preparing a huge transition in terms of moving more closely to the international standards. And again, the main idea being that our tax colleagues will accept these international standards for the tax purposes, which was agreed, and therefore we can include this measure in our strategy. That the tax colleagues, yes, there will have to be some adjustments of the tax claim, but the international standards can be used as the basis for this. So this will help the companies really to apply the standards with no need to simultaneously have double accounting. They will just, when they fill in the tax claim, they will just use some additional calculations, but it will save them a lot of time during the whole year. And there are several plans where our colleagues are going. I don't want to go into much detail, but I think it is all going in the right direction, and I hope that there will be a successful adoption of this. And my impression is that there are less and less opposition to this, as this is really discussed in very broad spectrum of stakeholders. So everyone is able to participate in these discussions, and I think the transition would be smooth. Other thing that again came mainly from the recommendations of the World Bank is something that is called Corporate Governance Scorecard, which is a project that the World Bank is testing in many legislations. They have a methodology that is already elaborated, and as I said, it is tested abroad and it works well. So we decided that this would be useful also for us. And again, this is a measure where we ask for further cooperation of the World Bank with the assistance of European Commission. The idea again is not a regulatory issue. It is again a non-legislative measure. Just a basic idea is that we will have some kind of awards that the best practices would be supported by popularization, by having a public events where the best practices would be promoted and shown on a specific example of a specific company that this can be achieved in the environment of the Czech Republic. And we think this would be useful, and it will help us also, I think, to meet with the companies that otherwise are not known to us. We don't have the occasion to meet them, but in this regard, we can find potential issuers also, and. Again, this is a measure that is complementary to many other measures which are already mentioned, but I would just point out that it is also related to the education of the SMEs. That this is not only about the capital market, but it is also about the capital market, because the corporate governance is really one of the big issues also for the investors. And when I was on a conference in Netherlands about fixed income, which is the traders that deal with bonds, there was a question on sustainable finance, and they were asked what they think about it. I don't know how much you are familiar with this term, but it means in the European Commission view there are 3 criteria. They call it ESG: environmental, social, and governance. And the response was, for us it is important, but for us the main importance as investors in bonds is governance. So the G factor, which I think is interesting, and it shows how important the governance is. And also, as a part of the governance, of the corporate governance, there is also this idea of corporate social responsibility. So also it has relation to the sustainable finance, which is now a very popular topic in the European Union. The other measure that was proposed by the World Bank was to help securitization of factoring and forfeiting. We didn't really know how to approach this recommendation, so we decided to make it more broad. The main issue being that in the factoring companies which are trading claims, there is only one non-bank company, one company that is not part of the banking group, and its market share is about 2 to 3%. So it's not really a huge company. The factoring companies that are part of the banking group, they don't have problems with liquidity, and they didn't really want to discuss this with us. They didn't want to explore this, even though I think it could be useful for them. For example, in Germany, it is quite usual that the leasing of the car leasing is securitized, but we try to think a little further, and we think that it is important to analyze, as a part of the analysis of the capital market, to analyze also the money market, where the main difference between a capital market and a money market is that the money market is repayable in 1 year, in 12 months. But more or less, the bond instruments, when I was discussing with the people involved in money markets, they said, like, if I issue a bond that is 3 years, has 3 years maturity, then for the life of the bond, for 2 years it will be considered as a bond, and the last year it will be considered as a money market instrument. So in fact, the bond transfers as it reaches its maturity to a money market instrument. Therefore, I think it is really important, and the capital market is defined in comparison to the money market as having the maturity longer than 12 months. So it is considered as a long-term capital. But I think, again, for the companies to be able to use their full potential, they should be able also not only to use the capital market, but also to use the money market. So to be able to use the market model for liquidity financing, for some short-term needs of money. Again, this is we are basically on the beginning of the analysis. We think this should be analyzed, but the basic idea is the money market is not existing in the Czech Republic. The companies are, when they are issuing bonds, these bonds are the long-term bonds, so it's considered as a capital market. But for the money market, we have only bonds issued by Czech Republic and Czech National Bank. We don't have any money market funds, but I think this is something that should be looked closer. I think there are some regulatory issues, especially with Act on Banks, but this needs to be analyzed. It needs to be consulted. And maybe we will find the right issue to tackle this. So in the end, I think there might be regulatory issues, so there might be a legislative proposal, but not sure if we can be able to analyze where exactly is the problem during the next year. But we are quite ambitious. We are discussing this already with our colleagues. We are thinking of a consultation material that will be prepared, giving the possibility to all stakeholders to express their view why there is not enough securitization in the Czech market, why there are not enough money market instruments available, and if there is a potential in this regard. So these were the main actors on the capital market, the investors and issuers, and then we think we should focus on the market infrastructure, meaning how we can help the professional players to be able to provide cheap services, high quality services to the market participants. Again, looking at the regulatory burden, if there are not any obstacles that come from national rules, if there are some obstacles coming from EU rules, maybe trying to negotiate it better in the European Union when we have the possibility, and measures like this. I would say that the basic principle on which the national strategy is based is the stability of the regulatory environment, because, as I said, the capital market is defined as a long term. So if there are frequent regulatory changes, this is detrimental for the investors who want to invest long term. But to be able to somehow conserve the current regulatory environment, we first need to identify any issues, try to solve them, and then we can say, so now we reach a stage where no further changes are needed, and this should be preserved. But we think we are still not there, so some measures of legislative nature are needed. As I mentioned in the beginning, the pension funds are the most, from my point of view, are the most important players in the capital market in the developed countries. Yes, there are other important players like sovereign wealth funds. For example, in Norway, there is a fund that owns 2% of all shares in the world, but this is mainly because they have oil and they put the money from the oil into this fund, and this fund at the same time surprisingly serves as a pension fund for the Norwegian citizens. So again, we are in fact in the pensions. If you look at the shareholders of the companies listed on the Prague Stock Exchange, like Moneta Bank and others, again, there are a lot of pension funds, Japanese pension funds all around the world that are investing in Czech shares. So we really need the pension funds to fulfill their role, and their role should not be to invest in government debt. Because, as I said at the beginning, it's that the pillar one, or the budget of the Czech Republic, is in this regard not sustainable in the long term. So trying to persuade people to invest in a capital market and then put the money back to the budget of the Czech Republic, it's not the way how this should work. There is this sovereign risk that is not reflected properly. Not mentioning that in the long term the inflation is consuming the savings. So we would like to see the existing pension funds to work better and contribute more to the capital market. For the transform funds, I think there is an issue that is very difficult to resolve. This is this guarantee of no loss guarantee, which basically prevents them to take any risk. But for the new type of funds, for the participation funds, I think there is a lot of potential, and they are growing in size. They will be growing, and we think that there should be some measures that would support this growth. And if there are any issues that prevent them from investing the way that the standard pension funds in the Western countries invest, then these regulatory measures should be removed. Also, what we identified as an issue that should be solved is the thing that the pension funds should be used throughout the active economic life of a person to save for its retirement. But nowadays, a lot of the investors in pension funds are already retired. So we think that in this regard, the pension funds don't serve the purpose they should serve, and they are considered by these people as a good savings, a product that is comparable to depositing money in bank. I see the time is already advanced, so I'm sorry. Just to give you some time for questions, I will go through the rest of the measures very quickly. So the next measure is concerned about investment funds, especially, I would say, quite attractive sub-funds. We want to explore more what can be done in this regard, including the possibility to have a tax-related measure, preservance of the holding period when transferring from one sub-fund to another sub-fund within one fund. The other idea is in relation to the executions. There is a lot of requests for the financial institutions for information where the people have their assets, and this is very costly. The costs, of course, means that the services provided are more expensive than if they would be if this cost wouldn't have to be borne. And we think that the solution would be to use an XML format, which means that the data can be automatically processed. There is no need to involve people in it. It can be quicker. It can be cheaper. It will save a lot of money. That will help either to provide more quality services to the consumers or to provide them with cheaper services. And again, this idea is still discussed. It doesn't relate only to the capital market, so it's a broader concept. But I think we are approaching to a solution that could be acceptable to all people involved and could save some money. The other things we are discussing already for a long time, it's the possibility to have a multi-tier register of securities, and now we are exploring it also in relation to the distributed ledger technology, these virtual assets, how they fit in our regulatory environment, and there will be a consultation on virtual assets soon published on the website of the Ministry of Finance. The other idea is specifically related to bonds, where we think that if we want to provide companies with alternative to bank loans, the most comprehensible for them would be to replace debt with debt. Yes, it is also possible to replace the debt with equity, but this is, I would say, more difficult to comprehend, and also I have the impression that the Czech companies don't really, that their owners, they don't really want to lose the ownership of their company, so there are only few companies that are open to new investors in equity, but in relation to bonds, I think that there is a potential. There is a possibility, and we want to explore what more can be done in this regard, both from regulatory side and non-regulatory side. The other issue is quite specific, and it relates to a particular requirement of U.S. law on custodians. That they should issue a due diligence analysis that they are compliant with the U.S. law, which enables then the U.S. Professionals to use their service, especially investment funds. So this is again a measure where we requested the European Commission for support, because also for us it's difficult to understand what it all involves. It comes from the recommendation of the World Bank mainly. And then when we were looking on the players on the capital market, especially, for example, as I mentioned, the pension funds invest in government bonds. We thought that the Czech Republic is also an important player in the capital market, and its role should be assessed and it should be defined, and we should really focus on what the Czech Republic should be done to be a better regulator, better issuer, whatever the Czech Republic can do. So one measure is related to the government bonds. Again, we welcome that our colleagues are preparing issues for retail investors or possibility of retail investors to invest in government bonds. I think this would be beneficial. We need to be involved in larger initiatives, so we should not only focus on the Czech Republic, but we should also look for inspiration abroad. We should cooperate with international institutions that have international expertise, like World Bank, IOSCO, and other important players. For example, currently European Investment Fund is beginning to play a larger and larger role for the Czech Republic. As I mentioned, we should be actively involved in negotiation of the EU regulation, because sometimes, especially in the terms of financial market, the law is heavily harmonized. So what sometimes the work has to be done on the EU level, and it cannot be done locally. Also, we think that it would be useful to continue with a practice that was tried in the past for few times, and that is to allow the regulators, be the people who are creating the rules, to meet with the market participants on spot, to see really how is the daily life going on, to be better informed, not to create the regulation just behind the desk, but really to see what are the impacts of the regulation in the real life, and how well it goes. Also, one of the things that was discussed is the MSCI indices, according to which the Czech Republic is considered as an emerging capital market. There are some criteria that need to be fulfilled for us to upgrade to a developed capital market, and according to the World Bank, but also we think it's useful. These criteria should be used as an assessment for the capital market, and see if there is something we can do about it, if we can somehow approach. We will probably never reach the target, not in near future, but we should see if we are at least moving towards the target. Also, there are not only private companies, but there are also companies that are publicly owned. One of the prime example is ČEZ, the Czech energy company that is listed on the Prague Stock Exchange, but it is owned, the majority is owned by the Czech Republic, but it's very, very, very liquid issue, very interesting for international investors. So we think that also the state-owned companies, similarly as the private-owned companies, should be able to use the capital market for their advantage, and they should consider it as an alternative to the traditional banking finance. To be able to be considered as a standard economy by foreign investors, it is necessary that the law is translated into English. Even though now the Google Translate works quite well, it is still not something that the foreign investors would rely on. So there needs to be an official source of translations, and we are already working on it. Several laws has been translated. Czech National Bank is already for several years translating all the documents produced by it, so all the decrees. But still work needs to be done, and especially the practice needs to be preserved, so that the translations are updated and they are not outdated, and they can be relied upon by the investors. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry for my time management. Now, if you have any questions or comments, the floor is yours. And please, you have also available the microphone, so if you would speak to the microphone, it would be better. Okay, thank you. So this is there have been some discussions. I don't think they are already closed. One of the issues that we were discussing is if we should allow the real estate to be included, because some people use real estate as investment for pensions. There are also other alternative assets that can be considered, investing in gold, in art. Basically, we are considering mainly financial products. It depends really how this will be structured. The main idea is the rule that is already there in the tax law, which is 60-60. It means that you should not withdraw the funds before you reach the age of 60, and you should have it open for at least 60 months, 5 years. If you withdraw the funds earlier, then you will have to pay the taxes. But if you don't, if you really keep the assets there until you are 60, then they will not be taxed. So you can they withdraw it and use it for whatever purposes you want. The question is that needs to be solved. A practical question is when you want to transform your assets from one asset to another. So, for example, you have your money in investment fund and you want to buy a real estate, for example, then how it is ensured that it is not considered as a withdrawal. So there are some practical issues that needs to be solved, but basically this is the idea, that there should be some kind of virtual account. There should be a definition what is considered as a withdrawal from the account, so it can be properly taxed. But yeah, it should include the currently existing products like the pension funds and life insurance, but it should be opened to new products. From our perspective, mainly these life cycle investment funds. Which are investment funds where you send money regularly, and the more you approach to the pension, the more conservative your portfolio becomes. So there is some kind of autopilot in it that at the beginning you invest more risky, more in equity, and in the end you move more to bonds and to government bonds. Okay, so if there are no other questions, we can finish on time, with 5 minutes being late.
Michal Záhoř, Komerční banka. I would like to ask you if it's possible to find out more information about the personal investment account you were talking about. Is there any material out there?
Not yet. We have received some proposal from Czech Capital Market Association. I don't know if you saw it, if you were involved in it. We sent it to our tax colleagues and we are discussing it. And I don't know how much of it will be used and how it will be used for the amendment. But I think basically this would be a basis for it. So, do you have this proposal? Or
No, not yet.
No, not yet. Okay, so I don't think it's private information, as was sent by the Market Association. So if you give me your contact, I can send it to you.
Okay, great.
But
thanks.
yeah, it is. I don't say it's outdated, but it is quite old. It's like from last year, and it is just a proposal for consideration. How exactly it will be formed will be decided for the tax law by our tax colleagues and for capital market law by us.
Thank you.
Yes, the speaker, it will start, I think.
Okay, Radan Marek, Prague Stock Exchange. It was said that the pension funds are the most important investors, which is correct. In developed world, definitely yes. And the previous government cancelled the second pillar, and now are there any plans within the government, or do you know about any plans within the coalition parties to change the current system somehow? Because I think it will be really important to establish this individual pension account. So was it discussed already, or is it just like thing within your department, or was it discussed with other people, or is this the first place where it was published?
In relation to the individual savings account, it was already presented on several occasions. Mainly on the pension commission, so everyone knows about it. As I said, the main leader of this initiative is Czech Capital Market Association. So they presented it there. They presented it to our tax colleagues and so on. So the material was sent for consultation to other ministries and. Also to market participants, so we it was already there was some information available, giving the possibility to other people to be involved. But as I say, regardless of the title, the individual savings account or individual pension account, the concept as such, which is the tax neutrality, which is that. Not only selected products should be have advantage from tax purpose. This is already something that again has a broad support, and it is already mentioned in the government declaration that this should be, this tax neutrality should be done. And in relation to, if I take your question more broadly, what are the current plans in relation to the second pillar? I don't know how much of it is settled. There are some idea in relation to the first pillar, but these ones I don't really consider. But there is, I think, huge discussions about employer funds. So we will see how this goes. I think these discussions are quite advanced. There is a broad support. There might be some practical issues with it connected, but I think that something is happening in this regard. Okay, so do you want to say something? It seems like there are no further questions. Again, if you think of any further questions, you can contact me directly. There is my email at the back of the brochure, which you are encouraged to take with you. And thank you very much for your attention and for your time. And have a nice day.